Hello once again there, digital world. Welcome back to another episode of Spliced In Later, our third for the week. Finishing off the very exciting week that is Barbenheimer, the long-awaited double screening, double showing, simultaneous release of two very different films. Greta Gerwig's wonderfully pink Barbie, which has already been seen and reviewed quite positively. If you want to check out that review, go do that. It'd be pretty easy to find. And now we move on to the second showing, the darker, the drearier, the more intense, the filmmaker's film. We are looking at Christopher Nolan's Oppenheimer. And this one's been a long time coming as well because of the recent Christopher Nolan run we've had here on the podcast, on the YouTubes, and whatever you're listening to. I tempted fate by counting down to this movie. The last time I did do that was for James Bond's No Time to Die. And probably through that action, I managed to get it delayed for 2 years. But if you are interested in anticipation for this movie, because of all the hype and buzz around it, all the actors in it, the idea that this could be Christopher Nolan's masterpiece of a film, we went back and looked through his time leading up to this. From his earliest days as an independent filmmaker working on the likes of Memento and Insomnia and The Prestige, to hitting the big time with his Dark Knight trilogy, to then becoming a big box office icon with Inception and Interstellar and Dunkirk, and then his attempt to revitalize the film industry with Tenet released during the height of the pandemic. Not all necessarily in that order, but through my years doing this show, all those episodes exist. If you are listening on YouTube, I've compiled them onto a little playlist, which you can listen. Just don't be alarmed if for some reason my voice sounds younger or older, or the theme music changes, or the logo is different. You could be going from a 2020 episode to a 22 episode and then back to a 2021, depending how you listen to it. But luckily this movie did come out. I think it was always destined to, regardless of what's going on. As I record this right now, the actor and writer strikes are ongoing. What the effect will be on the Hollywood industry after this date, and indeed on upcoming movie releases, is going to be interesting. For example, here in Australia, right before Oppenheimer premiered, they played a trailer for The Dry 2, but I have it on good authority that movie just isn't coming out anymore because of the strike. I believe there was some discussions about possibly delaying Blue Beetle, though I hear that's not going ahead. It's really going to be interesting. I think if these two movies, Barbie and Oppenheimer, do really well at the box office, I think Hollywood will try and push ahead with just releasing without the endorsement of actors and all the stuff that they would normally do to promote a film, and just see how they go. In a way, I kind of hope that's unsuccessful for them, because it means that they'll go back to the table and actually give these people what they deserve. But honestly, who knows? It's the Wild West at the moment. I'm interested to see what happens over the next few weeks. If Oppenheimer ends up being the last film I see for quite some time, it's a pretty good film to finish up on. So, after all the build-up, after all the Christopher Nolan stuff we've been going on and on about, after the big meme that is Barbenheimer, where people are actually seeing Barbie and Oppenheimer on the same day, with the extent to meme the living shit out of it and to compare the two and see which one is better, what here at Spliced In Later do we think of Oppenheimer? Do we think it's better than Barbie? Is it worse than Barbie? Is it Christopher Nolan's best film? Is it Christopher Nolan's worst film? Well, the first question is it a good film? Yes, absolutely it is. It is a fantastic film, very well made, very well acted, a very engaging film experience. The 3-hour runtime is a unique step into a world that you do get lost in and envelops you in a way that I always knew it was going to, and I'm not shocked by it at all. I hear the buzz online is that people are calling it Christopher Nolan's masterpiece, that it's the best film he has ever made and could be the best film of the century. And I don't dispute those claims. I think it is a very, 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 very well-made film that accomplishes a lot. I think what was set out with the idea of telling the story of J. Robert Oppenheimer and his work that led to the creation of the atomic bomb, which is probably one of the worst things that could ever happen for humanity, but it's happened, and we just have to live with it and try not to annihilate ourselves now. I think if you're a lover of film, if you love the filmmaking process, especially biopics as well, this film's going to absolutely be your jam. However, I gotta be honest here at Spliced In Later, and my opinion of movies is not just the status quo of this movie is competently made and everyone says it's good, so it naturally becomes my favorite movie. A lot of what I am influenced by when I review this stuff for you is just my own personal opinions and beliefs, which is what they should always be. No one should ever pander to the common thoughts, whether it's positive or negative. For me personally, while I think Oppenheimer is great and I really enjoyed it, and it's definitely on my top 10 movies, I don't think it's better than all other Christopher Nolan films. I think there's a few other Christopher Nolan films that I prefer over this one. To me personally, I wouldn't put it as the best film of the century. I think that's a bold claim at the moment. It's only 2023. We've got another 87, 86 years left to go in this century. I'm sure other movies will come out during that time. But stacking it against the other movies that have come out this year, there's quite a few movies that I prefer over this one quite a bit, to a point where I'm not sure if Oppenheimer even cracks my top 5. Now, that might be blasphemous, but again, this is just my personal opinion and just my belief on how I felt watching the movie. If you want to know the big question, which is better, Barbie or Oppenheimer, I do still reiterate that they're two very different films, and to compare them both is silly. Barbie cannot be better than Oppenheimer, and Oppenheimer cannot be better than Barbie on the exact same grounds, because what you're getting out of them is two very different films. On a personal note, which one of these do I prefer and which one would I rewatch? It's 100% Barbie. Barbie crushes Oppenheimer, but not because it's a better made film or anything. It's just, for me personally, it's the one I enjoyed, it's the one I got a lot out of, and it's the one I look forward to rewatching when these inevitably come out on DVD. Now, saying all that, that doesn't mean, oh, so Oppenheimer's bad. Not at all. The competition for 2022 is really strong. There have just been some really good movies for me personally earlier in the year that have just really locked themselves in as particularly high bars for movies to hit. I did expect Oppenheimer would be a bit better in reaching that bar, but I think it comes down to a couple of things, which just for me, I had trouble dealing with Oppenheimer, mainly being an excessive runtime, a big amount of characters that left me a bit confused as to who everybody was at certain points in time. And again, just the idea of coming back to Oppenheimer. It is an incredible movie experience. You won't forget watching Oppenheimer. I learned a lot. I understand way more about him and this whole dark moment in history than I ever did before. And it is one of those movies that envelops you in a unique way of storytelling and presenting ideas and thoughts and beliefs and all of that stuff. So it is a perfect cinema seeing movie. If you want to go to the theaters and see a movie, this is probably an absolutely prime one to do. So, I mean, the plot of Oppenheimer, everybody knows who Oppenheimer is, I think. Even if you don't know who the man is, I think most people can connect the name Oppenheimer with the nuclear bomb. Maybe they know his quote, "I am become death, destroyer of worlds," or something along those lines. Most people will know that World War II pretty much came to a halting end once 2 devastating nuclear bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki in Japan. And we do know that since that point, there has always been the idea of the threat of nuclear annihilation now that this thing has happened. So was it essential to do this in the first place? And now that we put the genie out of the bottle, what do we actually do about it now? But I didn't know who Oppenheimer was as a person. I didn't know how he came about to get to this point where he makes the atom bomb and how it gets deployed. I didn't know what happened to him after the fact. So it's an interesting take. I went with someone who does know a lot about Oppenheimer, and he did say like, oh, there are a couple of things which I disagree with just because it didn't exactly happen like that. But for the most part, he did say it was a very balanced view of the whole affair. It's not one of those movies that picks a side. Basically, it's telling 2 different opinions of the same story. As I've said many times before of the Christopher Nolan movies we looked at before, his favorite thing to do is use time to tell a story. The non-linear narrative, the unreliable narrator, giving you information after the fact. So things that don't make any sense in a particular scene will make sense 2 hours later when you get more information revealed to you. In the case of this movie, we are seeing a point in time where Oppenheimer is potentially having his security clearance revoked by a board. And then later on, you are seeing Robert Downey Jr.'s Strauss character, who is up for confirmation in politics in America, being asked about his association with Oppenheimer. And everyone's alluding to terrible things that have happened or will happen, and whose faults, who's done what to who. And through these two different stories, one told in color and one in black and white, you see the story from start to finish, though, of Oppenheimer in his early days, through school, studying, learning science and all that, things to do with black holes and splitting the atom, to the backdrop of World War II, and then this race to be the first country to create the atomic bomb, the weapon that will end all wars. And then after it's done and the war's over, where does everybody go from there? Naturally move on to bigger, more deadlier weapons. How was Oppenheimer involved in that? How did Strauss come into play? All of that stuff. I think the three main positives that come down to why this movie is pretty amazing is from the performances, from the direction, and from the way that the story is told here in the movie. So first off, let's start with the acting. Cillian Murphy as Oppenheimer. He's fantastic in the role. I love Cillian Murphy as an actor. I've been getting my Cillian Murphy fix mainly from Peaky Blinders. I'm sure most people know about Peaky Blinders, but if you haven't seen it, it's a British show. It's really, really good. Some of the best acting and storytelling I've ever seen on a TV format. It's one of those shows that shows how the line is being blurred between what can be considered of a movie production level and then of a TV show standard. Truly great stuff. Go check that out if you haven't seen it. I wasn't sure how he would go being Oppenheimer. As I said, I knew nothing about the man himself, so I can't really comment on does he become the character. It's not like in one of those instances like where you go see Bohemian Rhapsody and Rami Malek's on screen and you're like, whoa, okay, he's become Freddie Mercury, so much so that you can't distinguish between the two. But that sometimes is to a detriment. The most recent movie, Elvis, I think Austin Butler was very good as Elvis, but there's a point where you go too far into becoming the character. I think that's even a joke now at the moment, is that Austin Butler can't apparently talk normally anymore. He's just going to talk like Elvis for the rest of his life. I didn't get that vibe here in Oppenheimer. I feel like Cillian Murphy was playing a character, but he wasn't like, I am now Oppenheimer. He was just playing a very, very powerful, important role. He's such an interesting character, this Oppenheimer. I don't know how I'm supposed to feel about him. I had a little bit of research after watching this movie, and I feel like there's supposed to be a sense that you understand and appreciate his scientific mind, but that you should hate him because he managed to develop something that has become such a potentially world-ending phenomenon for the entire world. And then even after the fact, where apparently he took more of a stance against using nuclear weapons and the idea of that and wanting peace for all, apparently he never really regretted actually creating the thing that's causing so much trouble, which is kind of like a double standard sort of thing. So he's a very complex individual. And then he's apparently got communist ties, he's a womanizer, he's completely, does not have a poker face for sure. He's constantly making mistakes and missteps and all of that. So an incredible mind, but an incredibly flawed individual. And he was mesmerizing to watch. I had no strong feelings. I didn't really feel for him in certain situations. The movie sometimes, depending on which side of the story you're being told, if you're hearing the Oppenheimer side of the story, paints him more positively. If you're hearing Robert Downey Jr.'s side of the story, he's an asshole. And I think what's great about the movie is that it doesn't pick a lane. It allows you to decide for yourself how to feel about the character. So as such, Cillian Murphy doesn't overplay being Oppenheimer. He essentially is just being the character as he would, doing the things that he's doing. And I think he really conveys that scientific wonder at being that person that cracks and discovers things that no one else would before, to then that utter shock and horror at what has been caused. I think there's a difference between the theoretical perspective of dropping a nuclear bomb on people to seeing it actually applied and then realizing the blood on your hands or what that has effectively done to a human being, and the result is you because you were just after that Nobel Prize or something like that. And it really paints humanity as well in that sense as well. It's a lot of excuses for how we even got to the point to create an atomic bomb, and then after that, the excuses to use it, and then the excuses to move on to hydrogen bombs. In this movie, it's very much, we shouldn't make it, but the Nazis definitely shouldn't make it, so we have to make it first. And then when the Nazis have surrendered, World War II is essentially over, except Japan is still fighting. Then it's, well, the Nazis are gone, but we have to defeat Japan. And the way that the story envelops, where the first test run of the bomb goes off, and then within seconds, I don't know if this happened in real life, but those bombs are being rushed off to Japan and dropped on innocent people, is nuts. And then even after that, it's, we have to keep making bigger because we don't know what the Russians are doing. Seeing all that unfold and seeing how Oppenheimer is so drastically involved in one and then so radically pushing against it in another sense is an intriguing character study, which I was not expecting, really. I'm not exactly sure what I was expecting. Christopher Nolan hadn't done a biopic for me before. I really like his direction, the way he tells stories, but they've always been of a fictional nature, whether it's obviously Batman, but, invading people's dreams, going into space. The closest thing I believe he's done is Dunkirk, and even then, it's the evacuation of Dunkirk is a backdrop, but the characters you're focusing on are character of his own creation. Whereas in Oppenheimer, everybody in here is real life. Everybody exists. Everything that is going on is dictated from previous historical events. He can't really put a spin on it the way he normally would, but I think he does it really well. There's a lot of other supporting players in here, to the film's detriment, I think. Not in a way, I know I've mentioned it a couple of times recently, my pet peeve is always a stacked cast for the sake of buzz. For example, President Truman's in this movie, played by Gary Oldman. He shows up for like a scene. That is where I would describe that sort of instance where, it's Gary Oldman is the president. Okay. Could have been anybody, but it's Gary Oldman. That sort of thing. It's like, here's all the people in our movie. Each one has about 2 seconds of dialogue and appears for 30 seconds, but look at our cast. In this instance, there are a lot of characters played by a lot of big names, but everybody sort of has a very important moment in history, which reasons why they need to be in the movie and they need to be played by certain people. There's not a lot of stunt casting in here. For example, Rami Malek showed up in here, and for most of his scenes, he did not say a word. I was like, you're giving Rami Malek a non-speaking role? That's strange. But it's because he has a very pivotal moment at the end of the movie, so they're saving all that for that. So that's pretty good. And there's a lot of smaller actors in here, like Jack Quaid and Josh Peck, that play very important people in the history and the creation of the atomic bomb. So that's pretty good. However, the downside is because there's so many characters, and it doesn't really take a lot of time to introduce a lot of them. You know your main players. You know Oppenheimer and his wife, Kitty. You know Matt Damon's General. Robert Downey Jr.'s Strauss. Albert Einstein, obviously. There's some big players that are specifically given introductions, and you know who they are. But then there are tons of other smaller scientist characters, which if they were just helping with the creation and they did not have big moments to play in the movie, that would be okay. But there are a lot of moments where some of these characters are revealed to be communists or spies or are making stands against the creation of the atomic bomb or have run off to have affairs with other people's wives. And when Oppenheimer is talking about them in the third person, mentioning their names, a lot of the times I'm like, who's he talking about? Who has betrayed him? Who's not showed up for work? I don't really understand. So while it's great to see all these characters and all these actors get their moment to shine, a little bit more focused on who everybody is and just allowing the audience to understand that before we start jumping into betrayals and scandals and things, that would be great. Aside from Cillian Murphy, I think some of the standout performances in here, Robert Downey Jr. as Strauss, been a long time since I've seen him in a role that's not Tony Stark, and he's in a more of a jerky, nefarious role, which I did not expect because I know nothing about Oppenheimer history. And I thought he did really well. He didn't just be Tony Stark in a different universe. He played a different character, and he was able to do his own thing with it without just pulling on what people remember him from. He's not done the Johnny Depp thing where he's just going to, like, Johnny Depp is always the same kooky character in everything he is in, whereas whereas Robert Downey Jr., I think, is able to push that aside, which is good. I really like Matt Damon in here. His general was sort of an ally, but being a dickhead at the same time. Emily Blunt and Florence Pugh as the two women in Oppenheimer's night each get their own real moment to shine in the film. Emily Blunt gets a really good scene at the end. There's not a lot of people in the film just to stand around and support others. Everybody sort of has their own thing going on, and I really liked it. But at the end of the day, this is the Oppenheimer movie, so Cillian Murphy is putting in 220%, and he's great. And as I said, the direction by Christopher Nolan, I didn't know what to expect with a biopic, but the way he uses the security revocation stuff with Oppenheimer and the political confirmation with Strauss, those two different ways of telling the story of the past, the different lenses to look at things, is something that keeps you engaged for the full 3-hour runtime, because it's a unique way of telling this story. Something one of my friends pointed out to me as well, of course, people are wondering, how's the bomb in the movie? You'll be interested to know that the movie doesn't build to the atomic bomb test and then wrap up after that. There's a lot more movie after it. But an interesting direction thing, which I think worked really, really well, was the movie's never silent up until that bomb. Even in quieter moments, there's always like music playing in the background or like a hum of sorts. It's building suspense. You know they're going to test this bomb. You know it's going to be devastating. You know it doesn't ignite the atmosphere like everyone thinks it's going to. It's that instance where there's the dread of what's coming, but you know it for other reasons than the other characters do. But obviously, it's very exciting getting to that point, and the way the tension and the drama builds up to it. When that bomb finally does go off, it's dead silent. And it's done so in a very impactful way. You marvel at what has been achieved, and it's also absolutely horrifying. And then within seconds, people in Japan are dying from it, and then it's all hell breaks loose after that point. We are closer to the Doomsday clock than ever before because of this one moment in time. It truly was a unique film experience for me. What knocks it down for me from being less than Barbie or whatever, or not in my top films of the year for me, is I do think it's too long. I think there's things in the movie that can be cut out. I think while there's a lot of stylistic choices in here, 3 hours is a long time, which hits the rewatchability factor. I really enjoyed the experience. I thought it was a fantastic movie, but I feel like I've got out of it what I need to, and the idea of rewatching it again soon is something that I cannot even consider at this point. Whereas I could go and rewatch Barbie tomorrow. So too long for me, unfortunately. Too many characters that weren't clear who everybody was, which led to some confusion. But otherwise, it's still a fantastic film. I give it an 8 out of 10. It's easily on my top 10. Just because something is not number one doesn't mean it's a bad film in any sense of the word. In terms of Christopher Nolan films, I think everyone's jumping the gun with saying it's his best thing ever. I mean, you go back and you see the ideas in play in Inception, or just the simple success of Memento. It's definitely his grandest movie. It's the most successful grand movie he's made since Inception, I think. He has managed to purvey a very well-made good movie without falling over himself in the spectacle of it in a way that Tenet might have done, or Interstellar. It's an accessible movie in a way that I think a lot of Christopher Nolan films recently aren't. But, I mean, I still prefer The Dark Knight over it. So, again, it's personal preferences, is how you feel about movies, what you want out of them. Not everybody's going to like the same thing. But at the end of the day, fantastic film, well worth the wait, well worth the countdown. And if we're going to get a full-on Barbenheimer double feature meme out of it for a while, I think both films are deserving of solid praise and support at this time. So go see it. Thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed our big week of movie reviews. Sorry the Oppenheimer review is a bit later. Another detriment to a movie that's 3 hours long, meaning it's midnight by the time I get home and record this. And after I had recorded it, it's just not something that I want to then stay up late and edit into the night and then hope it uploads. So it's better to just sit with it, let it mold in your mind, and then do a fresh take the next day. Not that anyone really knows or cares what time this came up. I'll be back next week, probably for just something standard. If things stay on track, my next movie review for you all should be the Meg 2 sequel, The Trench, which I'm anxious to see because I'm scared of stuff like that, and I'll probably have to go see it by myself, which isn't great. But depending on how the strike goes, it may not even come out. At the very least, I will be reviewing Secret Invasion for you when that finishes up on Disney+. So there will be some new stuff coming amongst some older stuff that I can think of. I'm going to do an episode about the Mummy movies soon, so that's always exciting. Be sure to tune in for that whenever that comes out. But until then, thank you very much for listening. I hope you've enjoyed. I hope you've enjoyed my Barbie review. I hope you've enjoyed my Oppenheimer review. Both fantastic movies, both in the cinemas now. Join the brigade of everybody going to see it on the same day, because that's very funny. And I will catch you all next time. You've been spliced in later. Adios, muchachos. I'll catch you next time.